NATO Ambassador Matt Whitaker on the prospects for allies as President Trump crystallizes plans for tariffs and NATO members prepare to pay up for their own defense. Then federal judges hauled off in handcuffs as the DOJ collides with resistance from judges. And if you are destroying evidence, if you are obstructing justice when you have victims sitting in a courtroom of domestic violence and you're escorting a criminal defendant out a back door, it will not be tolerated and it is a crime in the United States of America. Doesn't matter who you are, you're going to be prosecuted. Former gubernatorial candidate Carrie Lake on the DOJ hoping to take down the resistance. When will it end? President Trump strips funding for Ivy Leagues as anti-Israel sentiment escalates on college campuses. Former HUD Secretary Dr. Ben Carson and the Drill Down podcast host Peter Schweitzer on the activists, the investigations, and the money going away for universities. All of this as Congress returns to Washington tomorrow morning from Easter recess, and Democrats struggle to keep up with President Trump's fast-moving agenda as another leading Democrat bolts the party in Florida. Florida Congressman and gubernatorial host Byron Donalds on the state of affairs today. It's all right here, right now. I'm Sunday Morning Future. And we begin this Sunday morning with President Trump on the world stage after almost 100 days in office. And just one day after his one-on-one with Ukrainian President Zelensky at the Vatican, speculation now is surging as to when the president will meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping as the economic soft war between the U.S. and China escalates. The latest provocation this month after China took over a disputed leak in the South China Sea, just miles away from the Philippines' most important military installation, with the Chinese Coast Guard unfurling the Chinese flag and declaring sovereignty over Sandy Cay in the Spratly Islands. All of this as a back and forth over tariffs between the United States and China deepens, after Trump initially seemed to back off of his 145% tariff on imported Chinese goods, and China responded with a 125% tariff on American goods. The Wall Street Journal reporting that the CCP is lifted, saying they are prepared to fight to the end. China also this month vehicles to military products, while threatening its allies not to export any military-related products to America. China telling South Korea not to export products that are contained with rare earth minerals from China to the U.S. defense companies, or face sanctions from China.
Fuck you!
Major shipping company
I'm somebody now.
has said its customers have canceled 30% of orders from China to the U.S., while Boeing said China has returned several planes and is refusing to accept 50 planes that have already been ordered. President Trump says now is the time to hit the Chinese economy while it is in a weakened state. Here's the president this week on the impact of his 145% tariff.
It basically means China's not doing any business with us, essentially, because it's a very high number. So when you add that to the price of a product, a lot of those products aren't going to sell. But China's not doing any business. They were doing $1.1 trillion. Think of that, $1.1 trillion. You know what that is? And it was just very unfair to us, and we were doing very little, relatively very little with that. It was a one-sided.
Joining me now with more of this Sunday Morning Futures exclusive is National Security Advisor Michael Waltz. Michael, it's good to have you this morning. Welcome.
Thanks, Maria. Good to be with you.
Well, we've got a lot to get to. Let's first start with that meeting at the Vatican. What progress was done between President Trump and President Zelensky at the Vatican?
Well, Maria, let's just take a breath here and take a step back. How iconic. That setting, that scene, that meeting is going to go down in the history books for President Trump to be a president of peace, to be talking peace and diplomacy in the Vatican of all places, just before we were able to walk out and the president sat with world leaders, people of all faiths, hundreds of thousands in the crowd. And the thing he was determined to do was to talk to Zelensky face to face and talk about how we're going to get the largest land war in Europe to an end. Both sides have to want that. He's expressed his frustration with both sides, but yet his determination. And if you go back to, we're 100 days in, Maria, just 100 days ago, Biden and his team had no end in sight. This was an endless war. This was a meat grinder of men and material and national treasure that really he had never defined victory. And President Trump is determined to use diplomacy to bring this war to an end, to talk to both sides. And just in 100 days, we've had multiple rounds led by Secretary of State Rubio, by Ambassador Steve Witkoff in Saudi Arabia, and now in the Vatican. And it was just truly special to stand there with other world leaders looking on as President Trump led the way.
Protect yourself and have a nice fucking day.
Iconic meeting for sure that President Trump led. Do you believe that Zelensky understands he's likely not going to get more land back?
There's been a number of discussions of territory, what they need to make sure that this war never continues, that it is permanent. We've talked to our European partners who you saw the images of both Starmer from the United Kingdom and Macron from France, that Europe has to step up. I know that you have Ambassador Whitaker, our new NATO ambassador, who's fantastic, coming on talking about how the Europeans need to take the lead in the future. All of those things are key parts of the discussion with both Zelensky and with Putin. And next is to drive both sides of the table, but they both have to want it. And the president has expressed his frustrations in whether both sides genuinely want to end this war. But he is determined to have the United States of America and him. And I'll just say this: the current leader of NATO, who was here this week, said only President Trump could break the deadlock that we saw 100 days ago under the Biden administration, and he's done just that, starting with his call with both Putin and Zelensky just a few months ago.
Of course, President Trump tweeted or posted this as well. He writes in a post yesterday, there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities, and towns over the last few days. It makes me think that maybe he does not want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently. How will the president deal with Putin differently?
Well, you saw also in that truth, Maria, that he talked about potential action on banking, potential action on the oil and gas sector, but he's determined to use both carrots and sticks to get both sides to the table, indirect talks, talking about those items that we discussed to drive this to a permanent end with European-led security architecture.
Let me move on because we've got a lot to cover, and I do want to get your take. You just talked about the possibility of using it against Russia. I want to get your take on what you're willing to do regarding China. The United States obviously has taken a tough stance against Communist China. The latest provocation is China has seized the disputed region in the security camera inside the bank. On top of the propaganda, on top of the surveillance, on top of the undermining from Communist China, will you put any financial or economic levers, including national stocks and places changes that are Chinese companies that are tied to the Chinese military?
Or you'll be fighting on all fronts.
Well, Maria, I'm not going to get ahead of our amazing economic team led by Secretary Besson, Ambassador Greer, Lutnick, and others. But look, here's what the president's determined to do, and I'm looking at this from a national security standpoint. We have to bring our supply chains home. We saw even cheap items like mask gowns and gloves, if they're made abroad and not made here, become a national security issue. We have to have clean supply chains for our military equipment. Everything from manufacturing to shipbuilding, which he just had a fantastic executive order on, to critical minerals, as you mentioned, to chips, AI, quantum. If we can't have them here in the United States, which is absolutely the preference, we have to have access through our allies, even right here in our Western Hemisphere. That is a key element. Rebuilding our military under Pete Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth, focused on meritocracy and lethality, is a key element. And then, of course, working with our allies, and it's no accident that President Trump had Prime Minister Modi of India, had Prime Minister Ashiba of Japan, made calls to the Prime Minister of Australia and South Korea. All of those pieces are key elements of our competition with China that President Trump knows. We have to win through our markets, and we have to win through our strong economy. That's how you avoid any conflict.
Is the Ukraine rare earth minerals deal going to get done?
Oh, the Ukraine deal is going to get done. The negotiators were working hard over the weekend. And that is first and foremost on the and the president. It's going to get done, Maria. The president's determined to make it so.
Let me just ask you about the Defense Department. Do you view this in what appears to be a chaotic weekend Defense Department? Pete Hegseth, of course, our Defense Secretary, has been threatening polygraph tests. He's been firing people who he thought were his colleagues. What is the state of affairs of the Defense Department right now?
Maria, I introduced Secretary Hegseth at his hearing. I've known him for years. You know what? Let me tell you about the soldiers, sailors, Marines that every day come up to me, come up to him. We just had wounded warriors in the office with the president that say, thank God for Secretary Hegseth. Thank God for President Trump as commander-in-chief. Just 100 days ago, we were more worried about DEI and climate change nonsense. Now we're focused on lethality and winning. That's been, in just over 3 months, the change. And what we owe is the best equipment that is on time, on budget, and lethal to those soldiers and sailors. The Pentagon that was chaotic was one that was the defense secretary that disappeared for 2 weeks just last year and nobody knew about it. He is leading from the front, he is leading the charge, and he has made words for leading. This is a media narrative that we are going to power through. What's that?
How's he going to replace all of those people so fast?
Maria, there's 20,000 people in the Pentagon. There's record numbers about generally. And the other piece there is accountability. We have had several general officers that weren't getting the job done and admirals get fired and get replaced, including our great new chairman, Raising Cane, who I just talked to last night. That's what that Pentagon needs. No one ever gets fired. There's never a sense of accountability. Now there is. And whether it's leaks or not getting the job done or failures in terms of procurement, acquisition, now you have a leader that's in charge, and I couldn't be prouder of Pete Hegseth.
I know that you talked about China being the long-term threat, but short-term it's Iran, isn't it?
Well, let's look at what the president has said. He has been crystal clear, no nukes, and he prefers a deal. And he prefers the Middle East that we saw in his first term, getting back to the Abraham Accords. So border secure, getting the Middle East back to peace, ending the largest land war in Europe, and competing with China in a very strong and tough way. That's what we're seeing in the first 100 days. All of that getting done, and it's been an honor to be a part of it.
Yeah, you know, that last month, 3 people tried to cross the border versus 4,000 they turned out. Yeah, exactly. We know that it's a number of those and success in the first 100 days. It's great to see you this morning, sir. Thank you. National Security Advisor, Michael Bill. Thank you, sir. And now this.
The total commitment of the US to NATO, a total commitment to the same as Article 5, to not attack on one, to attack on all, but also clearly a commitment that we have to speed up spending in Europe, do more ourselves, so that for the US it is possible for them to spend more time and resources on the Pacific, which I think is a logic.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte at the White House Thursday on the need for Europe to spend more on defense as the U.S. is bolstering its defense in the Pacific against that growing threat of China. This as President Trump simultaneously tries to broker a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia, with Russian President Vladimir Putin meeting with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in Moscow on Friday. Joining now with the very latest on the negotiations is U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker. Ambassador, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you so much for being here. Give us your sense of progress from our NATO members since you've taken this job.
Well, good morning, Maria. It's great to be with you today. Well, I think our European allies and Canada understand that they need to do a lot more than they have since they committed to 2% spending of their GDP on defense and defense-related activities. But, the message now is that's not enough. We have a dangerous world. You mentioned Iran, China, Russia is obviously threatening our European allies especially. And so it's a big, dangerous world, and we all need to take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime moment where Donald Trump is leading these alliances to make sure that they are ready to address all of these threats. And, I'm proud to work for him and to deliver this message here in Brussels and across the NATO alliance that we need to spend more money. That money needs to be dedicated to lethality, warfighting. We need to get rid of all the nonsense that we've seen kind of infiltrate our defense complex. And, we're moving out as fast as we can, heading to a summit at the end of June in The Hague that I think is going to be really historical.
And when you say it will be historic, what are you expecting in Hague? I mean, right now the president is balancing pushing these members to do the right thing and increase their spending on defense while also instituting economic tariffs. So it's playing into everything.
Well, Maria, you know that those two things are actually related. The underspending on defense coupled with the disadvantageous trade situation where Europe has run a trade surplus with the United States of $250 billion, just below the $300 billion that China has run every year. And so that is unsustainable. And our European allies.
Hi, what do you need?
We want fair.
One limo coming up.
That works for the American people. That's, if you look at Donald Trump's America First agenda that I campaigned all over the United States for in 2016, 2020, and 2024, that is something that delivers for the American worker and the American family. And so, I think our NATO allies completely understand what is at stake, what they need to do, and they also understand that the American people are an ally, that we stand for freedom and liberty all over this globe, and we fully expect that at the end of June we will sign a historic declaration with President Trump there leading the way. So it's an exciting time, but there's a lot of hard work. We'll roll up our sleeves to do it.
President Trump told me that he has already saved the United States $5 billion a day, that it was costing us $5 billion a day in tariffs, and now it is at a flat level. That is an incredible number that the president told me about. I want to get your take on what you're expecting to be the first deal with regarding tariffs.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you need to know anything about Donald Trump, he is the consummate deal maker. He wrote the book on it. And what you're seeing is he is trying to take these, and prioritize those that are willing to make a deal, those that are willing to lower down and reduce and eliminate the barriers to American products being exported from the United States to our allies and our trading partners. And so, I mean, I think right now at the White House, I was just there on Friday with the president, it looks like they are fully working on all of these deals simultaneously, but prioritizing the most important ones first.
That's been great to have you this morning. Thanks so much for your leadership. We'll continue to check back with you. U.S. Ambassador to NATO.
Great to see you.
Thank you, sir. Quick break, and then the new resistance to President Trump. Federal judges blocking executive orders across the country. U.S. Agency for Global Media Senior Advisor Carrie Lake on the roadblocks the administration is facing in court to enacting the will of the American voter. She's next. Stay with us. To the resistance, this week, federal judges across the country issued preliminary injunctions against a number of President Trump's executive orders, trying to stop the president from withholding federal funds from sanctuary cities, requiring proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote in federal elections, cutting funding to public schools that maintain DEI programs, with efforts to restore Voice of America, the taxpayer-funded media network. Here now with more. The judicial branch is having on President Trump's agenda is U.S. Agency for Global Media Senior Advisor and former gubernatorial candidate Carrie Lake. Carrie, thanks very much for being here.
Good to be with you this morning.
I'll mention one, the April 18th court case requesting an injunction against Trump's April 2nd Liberation Day tariffs was denied. The next court date is May 13th. How would you assess these federal judges trying to stop President Trump's agenda?
Well, they're completely out of control. I mean, they're basically usurping the power of the president. And I've got a district judge who's coming after us and telling us how to run an agency. The president has Article 2 powers to run the executive branch of this government, and we're seeing a whole handful of judges trying to stop that and really subvert the will of the people. In our situation over at U.S. Agency for Global Media, we're trying to modernize it, and we're trying to shrink it down a little bit because of the bloat there. And the federal judge is basically saying, you can't do that. You have to hire everybody back. And we hadn't even fired anybody. We put people on leave so we could assess and shrink this agency down. And the beautiful thing about President Trump is he wants to come in and bring this government under control. It's gotten way too big. And now we've got a bunch of judges saying, no, President Trump, you can't do that. The people voted for President Trump, and they're trying to subvert the will of the people here. I don't think it'll work in the end. I believe that eventually these cases will move higher up and President Trump will be victorious. But unfortunately, it's the delay that's preventing the work from being done. You know, we don't want to get rid of Voice of America. We want to save what's salvageable and maybe get rid of an agency and move things like Voice of America, Office of Cuba Broadcasting, over to the Department of State, where, frankly, the last time when they were under Department of State, they were effective. Now they have not become effective. They've gotten too big, and the president wants to actually shrink things down and get things a little more under control.
Well, it's not just the federal funding, it's also tariffs. I mean, next week we've got multiple tariff deadlines, including the implementation of the 25% tariff on global auto parts, the closing of the China-Hong Kong de minimis loophole, the Office of Management Budget assessment of the America First trade policy. Are you expecting these cases to go to the Supreme Court?
It's going to have to go there, and I wish we could just skip right over and get to the Supreme Court and get this taken care of. Because in many of these cases, you've got Soros-linked attorneys who are just trying to make some money and delay the president's agenda. And you've got judges who, you know, in many cases may be compromised. We're seeing some of this around the country. Why are they doing this? And so I think it will eventually get to the Supreme Court. My concern, and I believe the concern of the American people, is the delay and the time that's ticking away, keeping President Trump, keeping people like me that he has brought in and hired to do our job. And it's very concerning that judges are behaving this way. I would rather follow the Constitution than a judge who's got an agenda.
Well, the Democrats are pushing back and saying that the FBI arresting that Wisconsin judge, accusing her of obstructing immigration officials, is one step too far. I mean, to watch judges in handcuffs has lots of people up in arms. Your reaction to what took place in Wisconsin?
Well, if you break the law, you end up being charged. If you break the law, you end up in handcuffs. And it appears that this judge broke the law. And, you know, we're making sure that the law is applied here. Doesn't matter if you're a judge, you're a regular everyday person. And so I think if she broke the law of what is said about what transpired in the courthouse is true, then she deserves to be, frankly, in handcuffs and arrested.
And, she will get her due process and we'll figure out what happened. But we've got to get these people who are here illegally. I'm from the state of Arizona. We've got to get these people who are here illegally out of this country. It's appalling that a judge would try to harbor or protect an illegal immigrant that is in the process of actually being the victim that he allegedly abused, was right there in the courtroom, and she's trying to protect the abuser and the illegal immigrant. It's just, it's unbelievable what's happening in this country right now. And this is just an attempt, in my opinion, to stop President Trump and his America First agenda that the people overwhelmingly voted for. Thankfully, the president has brought in some really good fighters to D.C., people who don't want to become permanent creatures. I'm just as happy to doge myself out of a job and go on and help President Trump in another way. But he's brought in people who want to get the job done, and these judges are trying to stop us from getting the job done. In the end, we will prevail. It's going to take a little bit of time, and it's unfortunate that these judges don't care more about America and the will of the people.
Particularly since the border is likely the most important success story in the first 100 days, that's for sure, as well as bringing in inflation. Harry, thanks very much. We'll keep following your work. U.S. Agency for Global Media Senior Advisor, Harry Lake. Thank you so much. Quick break, then President Trump takes on anti-Semitism, cutting off federal funding to elite institutions who fail to end anti-Semitism. Dr. Ben Carson and Peter Schweitzer are here on why Ivy League universities are allowing anti-Israel and anti-Semitic sentiment to foster on campus. David Up. So don't get it. The faculty doesn't get it. These radical far-left students doesn't get it. But the fact that President Trump, not only is he revoking the visas for the pro-Hamas foreign agitators and anti-Semites on campus, he's also withholding those federal dollars. These universities are not entitled to those federal dollars. They have to ensure that they are protecting Jewish students on campus. So I think we're just seeing a failure within higher education. Welcome back. That was New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik with me here on Trump administration's crackdown on Ivy League universities that are planning to stop anti-Israel sentiment. On Wednesday, Auburn University filed a lawsuit against the White House over the administration's freezing of $2.2 billion in federal research money, with another cut planned of $1 billion for experiments to crack down on anti-Semitism. Even though Trump's president has acknowledged that the university has a major problem on campus. During an interview with former HUD Secretary Dr. Ben Carson and the president of the Government Accountability Institute, Peter Schweitzer. Gentlemen, great to have you. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Carson, kicking things off with you. Why do we stop anti-Semitism in it?
Well, people think that this is a recent origin, but this has been going on for a long time. You go back and look at the congressional record, January 10, 1963, Congressman Herlong listed 45 of the goals of communism in America. One of them was to gain control of our school systems and teacher unions so you can indoctrinate the kids. So now we're seeing the fruit of that indoctrination. The Marxists understand this very well. That's why Vladimir Lenin said, giving your children to teach for 4 years and the seed that I sow will never be uprooted. And it's so essential that the Trump administration recognize this, which they clearly do, and against it. He's asked all
Hey, what's up?
agencies within the next 60 days to list all
Okay.
to fight anti-Semitism and to put them into action.
You forgot it.
We need to be vigorous in this fight because it's very serious.
Well, one of the issues here is that foreign nations, some of them adversarial, send so much money to American universities. Tell us about the flow of money.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, Maria. And here's the thing. They're required by federal law, the National Education Act, to disclose large donations from overseas. The problem is sometimes they simply don't report them, or they purposely hide them. So, for example, if you are Qatar and you want to fund American universities, you set up a foundation in Canada, and you send those donations to an American university, the university lists it as a Canadian donation, not as a donation from Qatar. That's in fact what happened with Li Ka-shing, the Chinese billionaire who is linked to the CCP. He
donates millions to the University of California at Berkeley, but it's not listed as a Chinese donation. It's listed as a Canadian donation. And what we know, Maria, based on what fundraisers in the university setting will tell you, is that these foreign donations, unlike a lot of the American donors, have strings attached to those donations. They don't want just buildings named after them. They want to influence the curriculum and what our young people are talking in terms of what Dr. Carson was saying earlier.
That's exactly right. And isn't it true that